On the hot afternoon of August 7th, 1996, the Korzilius family was doing what so many families do during summer break: running errands, checking the mail, and enjoying what seemed like an ordinary day in their quiet Texas neighborhood. Nothing about that afternoon suggested it would end in tragedy. 6-year-old Katherine Korzilius asked her mom if she could walk home from the neighborhood mailbox by herself. It was a short walk, less than a quarter of a mile, and one she had made before, so her mom agreed. But Katherine never made it home. Within minutes, an ordinary summer afternoon became every parent's worst nightmare. And what investigators would uncover over the next several hours would leave an entire community searching for answers. Was this simply a heartbreaking accident? Or had someone intentionally targeted a 6-year-old little girl just steps from her own front door? Welcome to Find My Killer, the podcast where we take a closer look at unsolved murders, suspicious deaths, and disappearances, and the victims whose stories deserve to be remembered. I'm your host, Courtney Fretwell. Each week, we'll walk through the evidence, examine the investigation, separate fact from speculation, and explore the theories that continue to keep these cases alive. Because behind every unsolved case is a person who deserves answers. This is Find My Killer. On August 7th, 1996, Nancy Korzilius and her 2 young kids, 6-year-old Katherine and 9-year-old Chris, left their home in Elder Circle, Texas, to run some errands. The plan that afternoon was to stop at a few stores to pick up some things the family needed and a birthday present for her husband, Paul, who worked as a business manager for Bon Jovi. Then later that night, the family planned to have dinner and celebrate his birthday. The first stop was to the kids' math tutor. Then after that, they stopped at a local Subway restaurant for lunch before picking up Paul's birthday present, a set of golf clubs he had been waiting months for. By mid-afternoon, Nancy and the kids began the drive home to Elder Circle, a small upper-class community near Austin. But before arriving at the house, they first stopped at the community mailboxes located at the top of the road. Like many neighborhoods in the area, the mailboxes were all clustered in a central location, not directly in front of the house. So to get the mail in Elder Circle, you would have to stop at the communal mailboxes at the top of the street. So around 4 o'clock that afternoon, Nancy and the kids stopped at the mailboxes before heading up to the house a little further up the street. But before they could start heading home, 6-year-old Katherine had a special request for her mom. She asked if she could walk the rest of the way home instead of riding in the car with her and her brother. It was less than a quarter mile, and she had done it at least a half dozen times before. So without much hesitation, Nancy said yes. She and Chris went one direction through the neighborhood, up the house, while Katherine went the other way, the shorter way. Once they got to the house, Chris went inside and Nancy brought in Paul's new golf clubs. Then she waited for her daughter to walk through the front door any minute. Although she and Chris had taken the long way up through the neighborhood to the house, she knew Katherine took the shorter route and should be home any minute. So she waited and waited some more. But 6-year-old Katherine never returned. At some point, 9-year-old Chris decided to walk back down the mailboxes to look for her. But only a few minutes later, he returned home crying, telling his mom, "She's not there, Mom. She's not there." So they both hopped into Nancy's car and drove around the neighborhood to see if they could find her. thinking Katherine decided to take a different way home than she normally did from the mailboxes. After only a few minutes of driving around the neighborhood, they found Katherine's body in the street at around 4:15 p.m. This was only about 15 minutes after they said they last saw her alive and when she was supposed to be walking home. They found her lying in the street on the opposite side of the street, about 6 houses down from her own. She was lying in a fetal position with her legs stretched out straight in front of her and her face toward the ground. She was unresponsive but still breathing. Instead of immediately jumping to call 911, Nancy said she instinctively decided to pick her daughter up from the street and drive her to the hospital herself. From where the family lived on Elder Circle, it was about a 25-minute drive to the nearest hospital, Seton Medical Center. As soon as Katherine arrived at the hospital, the doctors and nurses immediately began working on her. They knew that every second mattered in a situation like this. And if they had any chance at saving this little girl, they needed to do everything they could. But they were too late. Between 5 o'clock and 11 o'clock that night, the doctors at Seton Medical Center did all they could. But Katherine's injuries were too severe. She never regained consciousness and was only alive because of her breathing machine. The doctors had concluded that she was brain dead, and at 11:30, Nancy and Paul took her off life support. Initially, everyone thought Katherine had become a victim of a hit-and-run driver. They thought while she walked the quarter mile from the mailboxes up to her house, a driver accidentally struck her and drove away without calling for help. So after the accident, Katherine's family and neighbors got together to see what they could do to identify the driver. What kind of monster not only hits and kills a child, but doesn't stop to help after they realize what has happened? A $5,000 reward for information leading to an arrest was offered up, hoping that money would make someone talk. The Elder Circle community was small and a place where everyone knew each other, and it just took one person who knew something or saw something to come forward. And maybe all they needed was a little financial incentive to do that. Like I mentioned a little earlier, Paul worked as a business manager for Bon Jovi, which helped spread the word about the story. Bon Jovi used his platform to tell people about what happened to Katherine, and even Bon Jovi himself begged anyone with information to come forward. But even his platform of millions of fans seemed to fall on deaf ears because the police didn't receive any promising tips. In the days following Katherine's death, the community feared a dangerous driver might be on the loose. No one knew if it was intentional or not. And it was even scarier for residents when they discovered no one claimed to have heard or seen anything the afternoon of the accident. Katherine's parents and the police knocked on every door in the neighborhood and spoke with everyone who lived there, and no one seemed to know anything. What was also strange about the scene where Katherine's body was found was that there weren't any skid or brake marks. So if someone had struck her with their car, it didn't appear that they made any attempt to stop or brake first. So although this hit-and-run theory seemed plausible initially, it had two major hiccups: the location of her body on the street and the autopsy results. From where the community mailboxes are located in Elder Circle, there are two ways to get to the family's house. You can turn right, which is the shorter path to the house, or you can turn in the opposite direction and take the long way. Either direction will take you directly to the house. That day, Katherine was supposed to walk the shorter path home, which was about a quarter mile long, but that's not where her body was found. Instead, she was found on the opposite side of the circle, about a half mile from the house, on the same side of the circle that Nancy and Chris said they drove home. Then, there were the autopsy results. According to the Travis County Medical Examiner, Katherine's injuries weren't consistent with being hit by a car. When she arrived at Seton Medical Center, she had significant head trauma. But besides a fracture to her skull, there weren't any other fractures or broken bones in her body. She also didn't have any other internal injuries that are usually seen in most hit-and-run accidents. Instead of fractures or broken bones, she had a lot of bruises and scrapes to her body, including cuts to her shoulder, back, hip, elbows, knees, and hands, which are more consistent with a fall and not a car accident. But a fall? How did Katherine suffer a fatal fall during the short walk from the mailboxes to the house? And how does a fall explain why she was found on the other side of the cul-de-sac? Well, according to Robert Bayardo, the county medical examiner, Katherine might have fallen, jumped, or been thrown from a moving vehicle. In a public statement following the autopsy, he said, "The injuries that Katherine sustained could have been the result of either jumping from a moving vehicle, being thrown from a moving vehicle, or falling from a moving vehicle. The type of injuries that we expect in these circumstances would have been the same." This announcement led the authorities to a second theory. Katherine might have tried to hold on to the back of a car, but fell off. But whose car could they be talking about? Well, according to investigators, it could have been her mom, Nancy. Not only does this theory explain the injuries, but it also explains why her body was found on the same side of the neighborhood she and Katherine's brother drove home on. But not everyone agrees with this theory, especially the family. How could this 6-year-old have jumped on the back of her mom's car without her knowing? There were also rumors circulating that maybe this was intentional. Whispers spread throughout town that maybe Nancy knew her daughter was on the back of the car, but she drove off toward the house anyway. And once Katherine fell off and Nancy saw what happened, she decided to drive off and make it look like this was some type of hit and run. Some people who believe these rumors pointed to the fact that Nancy decided to drive in the opposite direction home that day. Instead of following Katherine from behind or even driving in front of her. Within weeks, Nancy and Paul had hired a private investigator from Austin, Barbara O'Brien, to try to squash these rumors that Nancy might have driven the car that killed her daughter. And after digging into the case and evidence, Barbara O'Brien came up with a few conclusions of her own. The first was that she didn't think it was physically possible for Katherine to hold on to her mother's car, as the cops suggested. And here's why. On the day of her death, it was one of the hottest days of the year in Texas. So O'Brien didn't think she would have been able to hold on to her mom's car because it would have been too hot. It would have burned her hands if she tried holding on to any part of the car. According to Barbara O'Brien, there were only 2 ways for Katherine to, quote, car surf on her mom's car. The first way was to hold on to the metal bar on top of the car. Nancy drove a large Chevy Suburban SUV, and, like most Suburbans, its roof had a metal bar where you could attach something like an extra cargo carrier. So the first way Katherine could have held onto the car was to stand on the bumper or side of the car and hold on by the car's metal bars on top. But with the weather being so hot that day in August, would she have been able to do that? Wouldn't the metal be extremely hot to the touch? The other way she believes she could have done it was to hold on to the back door handle. To do this, she would have had to stand on the bumper, crouch down, and hold on to the door handle. But this doesn't make much sense to Barbara O'Brien either. If Katherine were holding onto the back door handle, it would have caused the back door to fly open. And once the door opened, Nancy would certainly have been able to see it through her rearview mirror. Or her son Chris would have probably seen it too and told his mom to stop. Then there was Katherine's broken finger. At the time, her left thumb was broken and had a splint on her finger. So, on top of all the challenges she would have faced to try and hold on to her mom's car from the top or the back door handle, she would have had to do it with a broken left thumb with a splint. So, if Katherine wasn't involved in a hit and run accident and she wasn't car surfing, then what else might have happened? Well, this is what the family and their private investigator have said. They think there's a possibility she might have been a victim of an abduction gone wrong. And here's how this theory could go. While Katherine was walking home, someone tried to kidnap her. Maybe someone was simply in the right place at the right time to abduct a small child. Or maybe it was someone who was already following the family home. Either way, once she got out of the car and started walking home, someone tried to kidnap her. Then, after she was snatched off the street and put in her kidnapper's car, she might have tried to escape by jumping out of the moving vehicle, explaining her injuries noted by the medical examiner. Or her kidnappers might have thrown her from the car. But that's not the only theory offered by her family. There's also the chance she was abducted and murdered within that 10 to 20 minute time frame. Her kidnappers saw that she was alone and decided to snatch her up. They then put her in their car where they murdered her. Then before driving away, they threw her body out of the car. But here's another key piece of evidence that makes this case even stranger: how Nancy claimed she found her daughter's body that afternoon. According to Nancy, it looked like her body had been intentionally posed. She thought Katherine's hair looked as if it had been smoothed down or brushed. Her shirt and shorts were both straight, as if someone had neatly laid her down. Her legs were completely straight in front of her body, and she still had her sandals neatly on her feet. According to Nancy, nothing about how she found her daughter's body suggested she had been thrown from a car. To her, it looked like someone had neatly placed her body in the middle of the street. But some people point to the fact that Katherine's body had been moved long before the cops ever arrived at the scene. So no one was able to document what Katherine looked like while lying in the street. But if she was murdered and her body was placed in the street, then who did it? The Elder Circle community is a quiet and safe place to live. It's not a place known to have child killers running the streets. And when the cops questioned all the neighbors who lived there, none stood out. So if Katherine was murdered, who's her killer? Investigators brought scent dogs to the neighborhood a few days after her death to see if they could pick up on any clues. And when they got to the neighborhood, they found something interesting. The dogs were able to track Katherine's scent to a vacant property lot about 30 yards away from the mailboxes. But after that, the trail went cold. This seemed to suggest Katherine might have been killed or injured near the empty lot. And what's interesting is that the lot was in the same direction as her house. And it makes sense that the dogs lost it there because after someone kidnapped or hurt her, they transported her body across the street to where her mom found her. But none of that has been proven. When the cops searched the lot, they didn't find anything. Without any additional leads, the case turned cold pretty quickly. No one was really sure what happened, and no theory seemed to answer all the open-ended questions. If this was a hit-and-run accident, why didn't anyone in the neighborhood hear the crash? And why weren't her injuries consistent with that type of accident? If this was a case of Katherine car surfing on the back of her mom's SUV, why didn't her mom or brother see her? And is it possible that she could have held onto the side of the car in that extreme heat with a broken finger? And if this is a case of a child abduction and murder, then who's the killer? And how was she killed? According to the medical examiner, Katherine's injuries were consistent with being thrown from a moving vehicle. So if she was kidnapped, assaulted, and thrown from her kidnapper's car, then how do you explain the posing of the body? In 1997, Bon Jovi released a song titled August 7th, 1996, the day Katherine died. Not only did he share a close bond with her father, Paul, but he also knew Katherine really well, since the two families were very close. Here's a small portion of the lyrics. It was another day, a perfect Texas afternoon, a mother and two children. Play the way they always do, as they raced home from the mailbox. A mother and her son, against a little girl of 6 years old, the independent one. Katherine's death not only took a toll on her family in the beginning, but the effects of her death were long-lasting. Her parents, Nancy and Paul, divorced only a few years after the incident. Then in March of 2020, Katherine's older brother, Chris, who was only 9 years old at the time, died in a car accident at the age of 32. At the time of his death, he had dedicated 9 years of his life to serving as a police officer with the Travis County Sheriff's Department, the same agency that helped investigate his younger sister's tragic death. Nearly 3 decades later, Katherine Korzilius' death remains officially unsolved. What happened during those few minutes between the mailbox and her front door is still unknown. Did a driver accidentally strike her and panic, leaving the scene? Was Katherine abducted before her body somehow ended up back in her own neighborhood? Did someone intentionally place her in the road to make it look like a tragic accident? Or is there another explanation that investigators have yet to uncover? Over the years, detectives, medical experts, and Katherine's family have all searched for answers. But each theory seems to answer one question while creating several more. And despite decades of speculation, no single explanation accounts for every piece of evidence. For Katherine's family, the passage of time hasn't brought certainty, only more questions. Questions about what happened to a 6-year-old girl on what should have been an ordinary summer afternoon. Questions that, nearly 30 years later, still deserve answers. Find My Killer is a Rockefeller audio production. The show is written and produced by me, Courtney Fretwell. If you would like to support the show, please consider joining the show's Patreon page. To learn more, please visit patreon.com/findmykiller. Your support helps to fund research, production, and editing costs. In exchange for your support, you'll get early access to ad-free episodes and, coming soon, exclusive bonus content. You can also support the show by subscribing, leaving a positive review, and telling friends and family. Sources for this episode include multiple articles from Medium, Unsolved Mysteries, and the website Unsolved. Thank you so much for listening. Subscribe to Find My Killer on Spotify or wherever you get your favorite shows.